Hi, I'm George Dodworth. I'm here at Texas 2K 2024. Behind me is the 2009 GTR Night Fury. The GTR for me was a childhood dream. In our country, we were deprived of the Nissan GTR platform in its entirety. No R32, 33, 34, 35. Then one day, I'm walking through the airport, and on the magazine stand, it says, Godzilla is coming to the USA, and it was a life-changing moment. Financially, this wasn't a car that I could afford. The idea of an R35, of owning a GTR, felt so out of reach, but by the time the dealers started accepting pre-orders, I had come up with just enough to pre-order this car. A year later, in October, I owned my first R35 GTR, and I promised myself I would not ruin this car. That was my good intention, was to keep the car stock, but we end up here. The first time that I personally ran a 10-second pass, it was intoxicating to feel this. For me, there was sort of no turning back once I added those first couple parts. You know, shooting for 9s, shooting for 8s. I was one of the first with a Motec, some of the early work in developing the firmware. So at one point, the car ended up in the hands of John Shepard, now very well known for building so many of the GTR transmissions. And he took one look at the logs, and he said, you're gonna need to send this car down to my friend Tony. Again, another kind of wow moment, I think, for anyone hearing this. I didn't know who Tony was. I had heard of Tony and a Honda, but there was no connecting Tony, this is T1, this is where the car is going. Before they would even arrange for the shipment, they prepared me for the worst, that really if they were gonna touch this car, they needed to have control of it in its full development cycle. And of course, they would inspect it. If it looked great, they probably would have tuned it and sent it back. But what they found was really quite awful. Things like main studs laying in the oil pan, pistons installed backwards, heads that I had paid to be ported. The factory casting marks were still in them. You know, the car comes back from T1, and it's fantastic. So now I'm heading to my home track now, you know, trying to run my first 8, which is sort of funny. A story not so many people know is that Christine was in labor with our second child, and I'm like, just one more, because it was running like 901s. just one more pass. And we actually barely made it, I think, with like 5 minutes to spare until our second child was born. But you know, we got those passes in. So having achieved the next sort of personal goal, now I want that 7. So the car's back to T1. You know, and actually, this is an interesting story. I think it's very relevant, that everybody should listen to this very closely. The quest for 7 actually started with safety. And as we talked about a fire suppression system, they brought this up early, and I'm like, well, fire suppression system, let's run methanol. The car was built to that new spec. I was hoping, again, to run this first 7. Instead, the car runs a low to mid 7. The media is approaching my car. 1320 is coming, and all these others that I've never met. They come up to tell me that I've broke the stock location record. This was really big for me because I'd never had a goal with the car other than a personal goal. But now the car was a contender for something larger out in the world, and that felt really exciting, and it felt like great to be a part of that team. I mean, it was almost gloves off now. They'll tell you that was the moment, that back in the pits, this was a full stock interior car, air conditioning, stereo. Well, geez, I want to go a little bit more. Was there anything left in the tune? Not safely. Those door panels came off for the first time. The passenger seat came out for the first time. You know, then we picked up a 1/10 and a few miles per hour. And then I had good intention that all those parts were going to return back into that car after the event. But they didn't. It was going back for larger turbos and, you know, this and that. Boxes started accumulating, and I've made that point about this is still a real GTR. All the steel is there. It's not front taft. It's not 3/4. It's not back taft. It's all there. We've not cut away from it. And in fact, I still have all the boxes of all those parts. And if challenged to do so, we could cut the cage out in a few hours, and all the mounting points are still there for all that interior. The fenders, I have it all. The car could go back to stock. We tried to choose a path that would preserve the character of a true GTR. If we're after numbers ultimately, at some point there has to be give and take, and for us it's weight. So this was the path to keep a true full steel GTR, still a Nissan DCT in there, very important. It's all-wheel drive. We ran it for 2 events as rear-wheel drive. And it was also the first time that we put 80mm turbos up front. So in one new stage of upgrades, it went from all-wheel drive, 7685 stock location to 80mm front-facing and rear-wheel drive. And that's when it made the number, when it ran the 651. You know, we thought rear-wheel drive was a part of that formula, but it just wasn't. That we saw everywhere, the 60-foot, the 330, all the way to the 8th mile. Even with those bigger 80mm turbos, we weren't getting the short track performance that we did with 76 stock location when it was all-wheel drive. So it was an easy decision to put this car back to all-wheel drive as it stands now, and that's the way it'll stay. There's no comparison. It was day one. We see the 60-foots back. We see the 330s back. It's going to remain a true Nissan with all the steel. It's going to remain DCT. It's going to remain all-wheel drive. From there, no holds barred. We're just not going to cut the car. So going through the car from front to back, it's hard not to start with force induction. 80mm Garrett's on there, air-to-water intercooler. We have 3 of the 1,000 horsepower Garrett cores in there. We have the AMS billet 4.3, and they've been a crucial part of this program from day one. We took the 3.8 quite far. We went 6s on the cast 3.8 with just an upgraded girdle. We never had an issue with the block. That was never the issue. We just wanted a little bit more displacement to help light these bigger turbos. Mechanical fuel pump, of course, a small fuel cell. Fuel cell's up in the front. It's just 2.5 gallons or so, and that's feeding 18 2600cc injector dynamics, Shep-Trans, belting as always, and Dodson, these new insane gears. We had the Extreme before that, but these seem to be holding up, which is a really, really big deal. Dodson clutches in there as well, 28 by 10.5 tire. Proud of that. The small tire car still doing really nice things. A very controversial component of this car is the aero. It's impossible to miss the giant wing on the back. Tony is a man of science, and I'm a man of science. I could say this, when we installed it, the difference in stability of that car, so it's a big safety. My wife has the same wing on Light Fury, and again, I want her to be the safest possible. It's a passive wing. It's actually moving based on the downforce it generates. So it's in a high angle of attack early in the track where we need all that downforce. If you've seen the old Japanese dyno videos, they load into the trunk and we've got to keep it down. The wing's doing that for us as we go down the track. But then it's tucking at just the correct speed. Great videos of seeing this happen. So the idea is it should be at a neutral angle of attack. It should contribute minimal drag. And again, it's back there, it is a wing, it's within the airstream. It has to contribute some drag, but I firmly believe that the benefit it's providing in the short track, traction, stability, safety, and again, also stability and safety further down the track. We may not want that downforce, but you know, I'm a pilot, so I like aerodynamic surfaces, I like control surfaces, so there's a little something back there to help us. GTR Festival, you can see my face has changed. I'm so excited. I had my first trip to Australia. I mean, forgive me, I've been watching Fast Fours and Rotaries and all the VHS mail order magazines since I was young, and just absolutely in love with Australian car culture. It's the best. You know, you'd think a person's first trip to Australia is going to see, you know, the cliche things you see in Australia. But for me, it was going to, you know, Croydon Racing Developments and seeing June 2. When I come back to Australia, this is the tour I wish to complete. I want to go to the rotary shops. I want to go to all the fast GTR shops. And this is huge for me. So the idea that Australia is coming to America, GTR Festival from Australia, I mean, wow. The honor to drive next to these legends on U.S. soil in Texas. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's too nice. It's too hospitable on the part of the Australians to come here. We must find a way to get the American cars back to Australia and continue this friendship. I mean, this is like the best in world politics. That's an amazing gesture from everybody from Australia that's coming. I can't wait.